So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, colleagues, wherever you are joining us from, and welcome to this workshop series, Communicating Science to Facilitate the Uptake of Research Findings into Policy and Practice. This event is brought to you by the Malawi Liverpool Welcome Program, VIOCRUISE, ICDRR, and the Applying Research to Policy and Practice for Health, the ACT program based at the Global Health Network. My name is Kelvin Gichia. I'll be chairing this session this afternoon. I'm a technical officer at the Africa Center for Disease Control and Prevention, based in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I support Africa CDC work in policy, health diplomacy, and communication in efforts to support Africa Union member states in responding to public health emergencies. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by our speaker, Lindiwe Badazi Mafuleka, as well as colleagues from the Global Health Network. So allow me to take a few minutes just to give you a brief background on why we are here today. Around March 2020, the Global Health Network, in collaboration with the Applying Research and Policy and Practice for Health program, ACT, did a stakeholder mapping exercise. And from that exercise, it was noted the role of science communication as a crucial driver for research uptake. Different stakeholders were identified from that mapping exercise, and these are researchers, journalists, policymakers, and advocacy organizations. These groups were identified and shown that they play a critical role on how scientific results are communicated, interpreted, and taken into policy and practice. So in this three-part workshop series, we are partnering with experiencing experts to present the communicating science to facilitate uptake of research findings into policy and practice. This today's series has been a cumulative of the two previous series. One was how to talk to the public about controversial topic in science, which was held in 21st June 2022. The second one was how to write a policy brief, which was held on Tuesday, 28th June 2022. And today we are talking about how to communicate with journalists. We have three main objectives on today's session. One is to understand the reason for discussing scientific information to the media. Number two is to recognize the means of communicating with journalists. And number three is to identify tips for undertaking interviews. Just to give you some important information and housekeeping, this session will run for 2 hours. The teaching will be a combination of presentation and Q&A. First, there is a live interpretation available in French, Spanish, and Portuguese. So at this juncture, allow me to introduce to you our speaker of the day, who will be taking us through this session, how to communicate with journalists. So Lindiwe Badazi is a research and public engagement manager at Malawi Liverpool Welcome Program, a research institution based in Malawi and affiliated with Kamuza College of Health Sciences, the Liverpool School of Tropical Medicine, and the University of Liverpool. In her role at the institution, Lindiwe leads a team of communication and engagement professionals to drive communication and engagement strategy at the institution, whose main objective are to promote ethical research practices, facilitate two-way communication between researchers and the public, and to raise visibility for the research conducted by the institution. So allow me to introduce Lindiwe. Lindiwe, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you very much, Kelvin. It is indeed my pleasure to be here. As I have already been introduced, my name is Lindiwe Badazi Mafuleka, and I work at the Malawi Liverpool Welcome Program, a research institution that is based in Blantyre, Malawi. And my role is in communications and public engagement. So I do mainly three things: community and public engagement, media engagement, and communications. That's both internal communications and external communications. I'm trained as a journalist, and therefore journalism is, I understand that I'm not very audible. Can the other panelists confirm with me that you can hear me? I've read in the chat box that I am not audible. May I continue? Kelvin?
Yeah, please. We can't hear you clearly.
All right. Just a moment.
I think now we can hear you now.
All right. Thank you.
Now, great.
Apologies for that. So I'll just briefly repeat what I said. So I'm a communications professional, but academically trained in journalism. I work at the Malawi Liverpool Welcome Program, a research-based institution that is in Blantyre, Malawi. And I work in the Communications and Public Engagement Department, where our objectives include community and public engagement to enhance ethical research practices, media engagement to enhance the visibility of our science and our research, as well as communications in general, that is internal communications and external communications. So what brings me here today is one of the three objectives that I support in the communications and engagement strategy of MOW, and that is to do with media engagement. Specifically today, as you know by the topic, I will be sharing my experiences and some of the general tips to do with speaking with the journalists. So I'll begin to share my screen so that you can follow along with the presentation that I have shared. And I ask for your keen interest as well as attention. All right. I believe that my screen is up and you're all able to see it. So as has already been explained by Kelvin, who is moderating this session, we have three main aims for our conversation today. And that is one, to understand the reasons for discussing scientific information to the media. I'll also be sharing the ways in which one can communicate with journalists. And then finally, I'm going to provide some of what I believe to be the most useful tips when you're undertaking interviews with the journalists. So to set the ball rolling, I think it is important that we just consider why science communication in general is very important. I would like to believe that most of us that have attended this seminar have a bit of an idea why science communication is very important. But I think it really sets the tone for the rest of what I'm going to be presenting if we can critically think about why science communication is important. So what I have shared with you that you can see on the screen is a definition that was given by Newcastle University. And this definition tries to explain why science communication is important and what it is most importantly. So science communication is a variety of different practices, methods and knowledge that a researcher can use to relay and explain what they do to an expert audience in a way that the other stakeholder, the non-expert audience in this case, can be able to understand in a useful way so that their life can be impacted or there's something that they can do after they hear what the researcher has to say. Now, who are these non-expert audience that we are talking about? So the non-expert audience can be people like legislators, it can be people like the media, and that is what we are going to be mainly focusing in our presentation today. And also non-experts comprise people just like in the general population. So this non-expert audience will really rely on the expertise and the interest in particular of the researchers to be able to relay useful information to them. This is because this non-expert audience really rely on the opinion of people that are more exposed, that have got expert knowledge, and they rely on them to be able to interpret this information in a way that they can be able to understand. Take, for instance, legislators, like I've mentioned.
they're responsible for formulating different laws that govern the way that we do things in our society, but they are not expert in certain subject matters, for example, health research. So they will need the expertise of the researcher or the scientist to interpret important information to them. But another particularly important stakeholder or an expert audience that we are going to be focusing on in this presentation is the media themselves, the journalists. So I'm going to share with you what I think are the top reasons why journalists are major stakeholders in science communication. And the first major reason why I believe that journalists are major stakeholders in science communication is that they can communicate to a wide audience. They can do that quickly, and they can do that more efficiently than a person who is not affiliated with any mass communication or mass media channels. Journalists have got easy means to mass communication channels and the technologies that are associated with mass communication. They have these things at their disposal. When we talk about mass communication channels, we're talking about television, radio, digital technology has given us the internet. We have social media platforms and all these things. So, and journalists have them at their disposal. And so they are able to communicate to a very large section of the population quickly and more efficiently than a single scientist. I would like to bring your attention to this quote by Edward Bulwer Lytton from 1839, which says, "The pen is mightier than the sword." So really, when you think about the pen, when a journalist writes or broadcasts something major, something important, it really has got a lot of impact in the community. A recent case example would be COVID-19. When COVID-19 first showed up on the scene at the end of 2019 and at the beginning of 2020, and the media was reporting about it, suddenly it took over our lives. It is all we could talk about. We would tune into our radio stations, our TV stations, we would click various websites to find new information about this strange new virus that was making people very sick. So indeed, the pen is quite mighty, and it can be mightier than the sword, if we can borrow the words of this one Edward Bulwer Lytton. And a second reason I believe that journalists are major stakeholders in science communication is that they have a duty to inform, and they can be watchdogs. So journalists take it as their own personal responsibility to let the people know what is important and what is happening in their community. So with this sense of responsibility, it means that they will go an extra length to find information that is relevant, to find information that is pertinent, and then share it to the population. So because of this attribute, they become a major stakeholder in science communication. If a scientist is performing research that is very impactful to public health, then it makes a lot of sense for this researcher to find a way to talk to a journalist and then make sure that they share awareness about the research that they're doing. And this journalist in turn will also feel a sense of responsibility to share this information. But this mostly works when the journalist is independent, or they are working for a media house that is independent, that is free, and that is pluralistic. Because if the media house is not independent, or they have a certain biasness, whether it be political or any other topic, then it becomes difficult for them to fully execute the duty to inform and to be a watchdog. I'm just sharing this so that we can have it at the back of our minds, that even though I am saying that the journalists they feel a sense of duty to inform, but there are some limitations to their ability to be able to do this. So just sharing this just so that we can know it as we move along with the presentation today. And then finally, another significant attribute or feature about journalists is that they have a nose for news. They can sniff out information that other people might not be able to find. So they have this very cultivated sense or an instinct of what is big news. They can see what others don't see. And that is why we even have what we call investigative journalism, where the reporters actually, in some cases, they might go undercover to find information about a big issue. And then we end up reading about things like corruption being exposed, exploitation of vulnerable groups being exposed, or anything that some people were trying to cover up, but then the journalists will be able to sniff it out, find it, bring it out onto the public, and then some things will change following that. So with these three reasons, you can begin to appreciate why it is very important that we consider journalists as major stakeholders, and that we should think about them whenever we are thinking about our science and what impact it can have in the community, as well as how we ensure that all the different stakeholders know about the impact of our science, and we can plan better and we can do better that way. So now we come to the question: how can scientists or researchers help journalists tell their stories? So, like I've said, journalists have got a duty to inform, to make aware, to educate, and basically they're just there to let us know what is happening. But then where does the researcher come into this equation? So I want to bring your attention to some of the sources of news. Where do these journalists find information from? Because once a researcher knows where a reporter is going to be looking for news, then it becomes easier for the researcher to use those news sources as avenues or platforms in which they can reach out to the reporter or get the attention of the reporter, so that together they can work towards bringing awareness to the research that the researcher is doing. So traditionally, the media will look to press releases to find information. They will look to reports. They look to adverts, and mostly these are published in newspapers or company websites and what have you. Reporters will also read some of the briefs that are issued out to get news. Reporters will also conduct interviews. So they will do this, mostly they will do it proactively. They will reach out to somebody and ask them for an interview about a particular topic. And also events are also a major source of news for the media. Just to mention early on that social media has added a new dimension to how a journalist would source news. I'm just introducing this concept now, but I'll speak more about it in the next upcoming slides. So, as I already began to explain, scientists can use these traditional sources of news to share about their work. I've already mentioned what the traditional sources of news are. I've talked about the press releases. I've talked about the briefs. I've talked about publishing on websites. I do believe that most of us here, we have institutional websites, and that is where we can share most of the information that we need to share out to the public. We also have social media platforms, and those ones can also be used to share information about the work that you're doing. So these are the actual platforms that you can also use to be able to reach out to reporters in case they haven't come knocking on your door already. So there are some points to consider when you are trying to reach out to journalists, for example, through publishing in the traditional sources of news. And I will share some of these points starting now. So the first thing that is very important for one to consider is language. And I am pretty sure that you have heard this quite a number of times, but it is that much important that I also have to share it again today. So in language, the main thing that you must always remember is that jargon will not convey the message that you want to convey to somebody who is from the non-expert field. So you should really strive to not use technical jargon. If you use technical jargon, make sure that you immediately offer a definition of what you have just said. And that way, you ensure that whatever you were trying to communicate gets communicated and that you do not confuse the person with jargon. And I've already explained that most reporters are not specialized in science reporting. In particular, in the region of the world that I am in this country, we don't have many specialized reporters. Save, for example, maybe in sports reporting, but in other areas of information like politics, maybe you have entertainment or health and other topics. Most reporters will not specialize in that because our market is not yet big enough to accommodate such kind of diversity. So you have a reporter that can pretty much do any topic. And because of that, you find that if you want to meaningfully engage with them, then you should stay away from speaking to them using jargon because they might not be able to understand. And also the other reason why you should stay away from jargon is that some of the research that is conducted by most of the researchers can be too new. So if the research is just too new, then chances are very, very high that not too many people know what you are trying to do. So it is important to use a very, very simple language. So how do you kill this jargon? Maybe that would be one question that most people have in mind, but unfortunately it never gets answered. So I will attempt to give some solutions to this. The first solution, I have already shared it. So when you share a jargon, explain it immediately after you say it. And then the other way in which you can try to eliminate jargon in your speech or in your writing is to use some online tools. There is this online tool known as Uptake 5. It is a text editor that is available on the website that I have provided a link to on the slide that you are looking at. Little disclaimer, I have not had a lot of experience with this text editor, so I'm not able to speak much about it, but it is something that I found as a resource when I was looking at what I can recommend to be a way to ensure that one is not using jargon in their speech or in their writing. But a short description that I can provide for this text editor is that it limits you to use only the 1,000 most commonly used words in everyday language. So pretty much you can just copy and paste. If you have written a press release, you can just copy and paste it onto this text editor, and immediately it will highlight the words that are not commonly used, and it will give you alternatives, or it will ask you to find alternative sentences that you can use instead of giving the jargon. So you can try this out. I hope that it really helps you. So another point, apart from the language, that you can use, that you should be mindful of, whenever you are communicating through press releases or speech, but mostly speech, is that you must use analogies and metaphors. So I've provided definitions of this, but I am pretty sure that we are all aware of what analogies and metaphors are. So analogies, you are using an example or a story just to explain something that would be quite complex. And then with the metaphors, you're using some comparisons. So the use of analogies and metaphors can be useful because they can help you to explain things in a simpler way and can allow somebody to quickly understand what you're trying to say. So it is quite beneficial if you can become more accustomed to the use of analogies and metaphors as you are aiming to speak to non-expert audiences about your work, especially if your work is quite complex or if your work is relatively new, that it is not widely known, even amongst your peers as well. Another point that you must consider is that you must give access. So this is access to yourself or access to your study team. I've mentioned, when I was mentioning the ways in which reporters will source news, one of the things that I mentioned was that reporters will conduct interviews. Now, you can imagine that if you are not accessible, then it will be really difficult for the reporter to sit down with you and ask you a few questions. So it is quite important that after realizing why it is very important to give out health information or research information or scientific information, if you really do understand the importance and you accept that this is something that is part of responsibility to the community, then it should be quite possible for you to be able to give access. Of course, there are some limitations like time and things like those, but in as much as possible, it is always quite useful to give access to yourself or maybe to your study team. If you are not able to be there individually, then if you have a large team or not even a very large team, but if there are several of you on the study, try as much as possible to ensure that there's somebody who can be reached out to by a journalist who is looking for a story about what you are doing. And fortunately for us, social media has really opened up this access. So one way in which you can be accessible is to maybe have a social media presence. Twitter is quite popular. I've seen a lot of researchers have got Twitter accounts and they tweet about their work or they give their opinion to some matters of significance. I've seen that most reporters are also on Twitter and they do see those tweets. And once they see something interesting, they can pick it up and then they can reach out to you and then together you can come up with something that can be used by the public. So access is really, really, really important to consider. And even quite importantly, another point to consider, another useful tip is that you must provide context. So give background information, explain your scope and your limitations, present clear facts and present supporting information. You need to ensure that you are being well understood by your audience. Why I'm saying that context is very important is that now, I would say, unfortunately, we're living in an age where digital media has made it very easy for everybody to be a publisher, everybody to say anything about everything. And sometimes you find that sensationalism can occur. So some publications will just want to say news that is spicy, news that is attractive, that will get them more readers. And when they get more readers, then it means that they get more adverts, things like those. So as a researcher who is granting information to outlets like those ones, you should really make sure that you have provided adequate context to the press release that you're giving out, so that you do not give room to anything sensational or being misquoted, being misrepresented. So context is key. Give enough background information, present clear facts. If you have statistics to back up what you are saying, provide those statistics. If you're able to even provide quotes in your press releases, you can go ahead and provide direct quotes from an expert, so that proper attributions can be made about what is being said. And then another very important point to remember is to be concise. Now, I understand the temptation to want to explain everything, but when you do explain everything, you end up losing people's interest, because now, with the digital age, we are getting more accustomed to getting bite-sized information. I've already spoken about Twitter. So Twitter, you only write a few characters, and that is the news that most people in the community are now they now look forward to and are more interested in. So if you're not concise and you ramble on and on and on, there are chances that people will lose interest in what you have to say. So when you're being concise, you make sure that you are presenting your main points very clearly. How do you do this? You give headings, you use bullet points if it is a press release, a written press release, or a brief, or even an article or a blog. You use bullet points, and where possible and where applicable, you also use visuals. So another way in which you can be concise, and especially when you are being interviewed, let's say on a live TV program or a radio program, you need to plan what you want to say in advance, so that way you can avoid using filler words, and you can avoid rambling. When you're using too many filler words, you might end up losing the interest of some of the viewers or listeners, because when you continuously have to listen to a person going like it's like somebody can lose interest. So try as much as possible to plan ahead what you want to say, so that you eliminate the use of filler words, and that you don't ramble on and on and on and on and on. And now, let's get a little bit more practical. So I've spoken about press releases as being one of the sources of news for a journalist, and also being one of the tools that a researcher or a scientist can use to be able to communicate to journalists and other stakeholders. So I want us just to talk a little bit about press releases. So they are quite commonly used, and they are there to serve as an accurate presentation of your work, and they're also there to promote a cause. Let's say you have a call to action, or something that is quite significant, that is of community value, then you can use a press release to do that. The standard format of a press release is that it needs to have a heading, and the heading should summarize what you are trying to say. It needs to have a dateline, so people need to know how current your information is. Say you are issuing out the press release today, then today's date, the 5th of July, has to be on the press release. And you also make sure that you put the most important information first. So I'll give you an example of a press release that I worked on sometime last year. So we here at MOW, we have a study that was testing out the efficacy of a typhoid vaccine in children, young children starting from 9 months. And we did this study. The study's results showed that the vaccine, the typhoid vaccine, had an efficacy of about 88%. So we had to share out this information to various stakeholders, and one of them was to share out this information to the media. So we wrote a press release about this. And the first sentence of the press release actually said that we have conducted a study about a typhoid vaccine, and it is showing that the vaccine has got an 88% efficacy. That was in the first paragraph of the press release. So that is just to let you know that you present the most important information first in a press release. You do not begin with the background, because there are a number of reasons. Some journalists will not read the whole thing to the end, or sometimes it's mostly that they will not read the whole information, the whole thing to the end. So you would need to put the most important information first. And also, when you put the most important information first, it allows them to become interested in what you have to say. So chances are high that they're going to continue to read the whole thing. And then in the rest of the press release, you make sure that you summarize the key points, like the supporting information, the top line results, if you have statistics and what have you. And it is also important to quote some quotes, quote the expert themselves. If you are the expert in the study, quote yourself, and any other relevant quotes. And then most importantly as well, you also should add some contact information, so that if a reporter is interested in conducting a follow-up, they should know who they should contact, and they should reach out and to that person easily. So I spoke about social media as adding a new dimension to how reporters are going to source news and how news is shared in this digital age. So I just want to speak a little bit more about this. So social media is increasingly becoming an important tool for journalists for finding news content, and also distributing news to their audiences. So like I mentioned earlier, on Twitter, you have a lot of people that share a lot of interesting information, and journalists will be on Twitter watching out for that. And at the same time, even the traditional news outlets, like you have things like in Malawi, I'll mention the two main publications. We have the Nation newspaper and the Times newspaper. So these ones are also now present on social media, and they're able to share their bite-sized information to consumers of social media. So it has come one way in which these two major newspapers that are print-based are now able to reach out to various audiences in the country. So social media has really become such kind of a game changer that it is influencing the ways in which we tell news, how we talk about things, and it has also given power to different people to become publishers and broadcasters themselves. And what is increasingly becoming a trend is that social media appears to be more preferred than traditional news. So this brings me back to the point earlier that I said that it is important that you should be accessible. And I recommend that you should have, if you are willing to, you should have like a social media profile, whether it's Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever your preference. So this is because what I'm saying now is more and more people are preferring and turning to social media for news. So it is important to also be present on social media. That way you ensure that you can reach out to various audiences. And like I said, it's important that when you're using social media, you should be aware of the rules of social media. Social media has got its own rules. You don't want to ramble on and on and on. You don't want to use jargon. I'm repeating this point. And also just to mention, whilst I'm on the topic of jargon, also just to mention, some might feel that if they are simplifying their science too much and using less technical jargon, they might feel that maybe they are dumbing it down, but it's not really dumbing it down. It's you trying to expand your audience. So you are not just going to appeal to people that are your peers, are your colleagues, but you are expanding your audience to people that would primarily not be familiar with the terms that you are used to, that you use on a frequent basis. But when you use simpler language, you reach out to people that would not normally read a scientific journal, for example. So rules of social media: simple, make it simple, make it understandable, and make it attractive. So that is why I also said that use of visuals can also be an important tip for you to follow. So about social media, I think pretty much this is what I can say. There's a lot more, since this is something that continues to evolve, but the standard, as per my experience and as per my practice, is that social media is really being preferred over traditional media, and that as researchers we can also learn to embrace it so that we can exercise our duty to the community in which we are conducting our research. And our research has got impact. I've already given the example about COVID. When the COVID vaccine, for instance, was being developed, everybody was looking to the news to find out when it's going to be ready. What are the risks? Should I really take it? Who should go first? So it was the media that really drove this agenda and gave people the assurance that the COVID vaccine would be safe. And now we're even seeing it with monkeypox. So we are looking out to the media to find out more information about, okay, where is it going to next? What is it leaving on its trail, and things like those. And then finally, the last part of my presentation today is interviews. Now you remember that this talk, it's about how to talk to journalists. So one of the ways in which you talk to journalists will be through interviews. So I'll just give you some general tips. I would like to believe that many of us here have gone through a number of different interviews, whether they were for scholarships or jobs even. We have gone through the hot seat of the interview. So we are quite aware of some of the better tips that are out there, but the tips that I'm going to share today are going to be to do mostly with how to handle media interviews. So when you are preparing for the interview, it's quite good to do your due diligence and research the media house. Learn if they have a particular viewpoint and learn who their audience is. If they have a certain biasness towards something that is not in line with what you're doing, then you'll be able to plan better whether you want to pursue to go ahead with that interview or you want to decline it. And it's also important to find out who their audience is. What age group are they? So what are young people going to be mostly interested in? What are old people going to be interested in? What is the range of their audience? So it's important that you should know who the audience is, and that way you'll be able to plan what you're going to say much better. It's also important for you to know the topic that the journalist is interested in interviewing you about. So what does the journalist want to know about? So you can talk to them in advance of the interview. Ask them, what's your story angle? Why are you pursuing this? Okay, and how can I help you? So this will also help you a lot when you're preparing, because you come with the facts and you lay them down in a much more proper manner, interesting manner, and you can ensure that the interview that you're going to have will go on well. When you're also preparing for the interview, you can ask beforehand for the questions. So most reporters will not mind this. Actually, they expect it. It's part of the normal practice. Others might not be so keen, but generally, the majority will be okay with you asking for the questions beforehand. But even if they give you the questions, some might add a few more questions later on. So you should be prepared to be challenged. And I will repeat this: prepare what you say. Have the facts ready, the analogies, the metaphors that I've talked about, and also eliminate the jargon. Yeah. So when you are now speaking with the journalist, when you are responding to their questions, it is important that you keep the audience in mind. So you are not just talking to the journalist that you are facing at that moment, but you are actually talking to the audience that the journalist is going to be talking to or is going to be writing to. So you keep those people in mind. And by this, I mean you should present your points clearly, number them if possible. You say, this study is important because of number 1, number 2, number 3. That way people will be able to follow along much better. And repeat the main points is very important, because you need to ensure that at the end of the day, the reporter will walk away with the main point that you are trying to carry across. So is your main point a call to action, or are you just trying to create awareness? Make sure that this is clear by the time that you are done talking to the journalist. Again, repeated point, use simple language. And like I've said, simple language does not mean that you are watering down your research, but you are just trying to expand your audience. Also, when you are speaking with the journalist, remember to be truthful. So you need to support your facts. You need to state what your limitations were in the study. This way you will not be misquoted, and you will not end up misinforming people deliberately. And don't be afraid to say that I do not know the answer to that. You can say it, it's fine. It's better to be truthful than to give a half the truth or give something that you cannot back up. It is also important to keep mindful of the mechanics. I'm talking about the speech mechanics here. Don't speak too quickly or too slowly. So try to vary your pitch and your tone, and also watch out for your body language. If it is a televised interview and you're looking uncomfortable or uninterested, it will not look good. So be mindful of your body language, smile, nod. You know these things. I hope you know these things. All right. So with those last few tips, it now brings me to the end of my presentation. I hope that you have found it useful, and I'll be happy to take any of your questions or comments. So thank you very much for your attention. Looking forward to your questions and answer. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lindiwe. That's Lindiwe, our speaker for this session. Now I think we'll go straight to the Q&A part. I see we already have questions, so I'll request Wema if you are able to read out the questions so our speaker can respond to them. Over to
you. Kelvin, thank you very much for that. And thanks, Lindiwe, for your very insightful presentation. Let me just encourage the participants to keep your questions coming in the Q&A. And then I will be moderating the answered questions, but feel free, Kelvin, to read them out to Lindiwe as you are the chair. I'm happy to help here and there. But mostly I'll just be looking at which questions have been answered and signpost anything that's left hanging. But yeah, feel free to proceed.
Okay, thank you so much, Wema. We have a question from Maurice Katunga, and Maurice is asking, how do we handle situation of having technical or scientific words that can't be translated into local language, but we still want to communicate to community members by a journalist in a local language?
All right, so would it be one question at a time or several? But I prefer one question at a time.
Okay, please go ahead and answer that.
All right, yes, so this happens quite often, and I can give you my experience that my native language is Gichia, and our business language is English. So our research is in English. So it becomes quite difficult when we go out to the community and we are required to translate some things that are simply not there in the Gichia language. So in most times we use analogies to explain things, but this doesn't always work. So it really becomes a challenge. Sometimes instead of using the direct translation of the word, we expand the word into a longer sentence so that it can carry the almost same meaning as the word in English. So what I find to be very useful is not to strive to look for the direct translation word, but rather use a sentence to explain what we're trying to say. I hope this helps. But yes, I do acknowledge that this becomes a problem more often than not. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that question, Maurice. The next question comes from Dasalam. Dasalam is asking, is there a common template for how to communicate with journalists? How it differs from communication for scientific community?
All right, common template. So it will just be the tips that I've shared are applied generally, no matter your context. So things like don't use jargon, use simple language, prepare in advance. These ones are the standard procedures. So once you are aware of these and you understand them, you should be able to be fine.
Thank you so much. The other question comes from Musakanya. Musakanya is asking, how do you recommend reaching out to all building relationship with journalists to get the interview or your article to be published?
All right, so I will share an example. I don't know how practical it is going to be in your context, but here in the Malawi Liverpool Welcome Program, we have a special project that is specifically for engaging with the media. So we call it Journalist in Resident project, whereby we ask reporters to apply to be part of the project. And then once they do that, we bring them in, we pair them with the researcher, and then they undertake what we call co-learning. So the journalist will be engaging with the researcher to learn more about their science, whilst the researcher will be engaging with the journalist to learn more about what is news, how do you write good blog posts, or how do you reach out through social media. So it is a mutual learning experience between the two. And then in addition to them being paired up for mentorship and for learning, we also facilitate quarterly meetings. We invite the reporters. They come to listen to different presentations, not for the purpose of just giving out news, but for the purpose of learning how research is done. So the researchers will explain what they do, why they're doing it, the methods they use, and it becomes more like a lecture, and then the reporters will learn more about research in that way. So that is one of the techniques that we use here in MOW. I don't know if it can work in your session, but definitely for us, it is working out, and we are seeing a lot of impact from it.
Thank you so much. Probably also to just add on that question, I think Lindiwe just mentioned when he was doing his presentation that it is also important for researchers to do some background research on the media station they want their articles or their research to be published. So it is also important you do some background information, you know what content or what topics does this media station covers or their interest, and that way you'll be able to build this relationship, and you'll find some of these media stations are interested in your research or your topic. So to just go to the next question is, how do you deal with something that you say or write being taken out of context or misunderstood by journalists?
Yeah, unfortunately, this does happen. So what you can do, firstly, you should try and see if you can safeguard against that. If you have a good relationship with the reporter, you've granted them the interview, they write the article or they produce the broadcast, you can ask them if you can cross-check the content. If the journalist is somebody that you have already built a good relationship with, they will not be offended and they will not consider that as censorship. So you can take a look at what they have written, and if you notice that something has been taken out of context, you can let them know that it has been taken out of context. But in the event that they have gone ahead, put it in print or broadcast, and later on it has already been consumed by people and you are seeing that you have completely been misrepresented, then you can contact the journalist and let them know that I have been misrepresented. And in many cases, depending on some other factors, the reporters will produce a retraction and they'll say that we did not represent this correctly. And this has become easier to do, especially with social media. They can simply write on their social media platforms that we reported on such a story. Unfortunately, we have misrepresented the facts. What the person had intended to say was this, and then they'll issue an apology, and that is how things can be corrected. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would also encourage participants to please use the Q&A chat to ask your questions. So I've seen a few questions in the chat. Please, I encourage you to use the Q&A icon. So the next question comes from Adikari. Adikari is asking, how do you communicate with special groups such as locals or special risk groups?
All right, so I think this is outside the scope, but I'll still try just to share my experience with this. So what you need is firstly to engage with the special group and research about them, find out their different characteristics, the language they use, what they're comfortable with, what they're not comfortable with, their level of knowledge. You can find this out from just doing an assessment of the community. You can talk to various stakeholders about this particular group. Once you get to know more about them, it's like getting to know your audience. This is something that we do in journalism, get to know your audience. So when you find out information about that group, then you can be able to prepare appropriately how you should be able to go and speak with them. But it is always important to research, and this is part of you doing your due diligence. You don't want there and risk offending them or being misunderstood by them because you did not take the time to find out their qualities, their factors, their beliefs, their way of life, etc., etc. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lindiwe. We have another interesting question from Avril. So Avril is asking, how do you handle reporters that always demand money or do not cover your news when you don't offer some sort of incentive to them?
Yes, a bit of a sticky one. So when it comes to that, really, what you're supposed to do is talk to the editors at the media houses in the most respectful way possible. So you can talk to the editor and say that such reporter has told me explicitly that they will not give me coverage unless if I give out this money. So the editor will take responsibility for that. But in Malawi, and I'm sure in other parts of the world, it is strictly unethical for a reporter to demand payment before a story is published. Unless if it is actually an advert and you tell them this is an advert, then they are not supposed to demand money. So when that happens, the best thing to do, which might also be slightly uncomfortable, is to talk to their editor. Let them know that this is what is being asked from you.
Okay, thank you so much. We have another question coming in from Micheline. Micheline is asking, I would like to know how to manage stress during an interview, audio or audiovisual.
How to manage stress. I would think that one would undergo stress in an interview where they have not adequately prepared what they want to say. So I'll go back to the points that I shared, that you have to get to know the topic. Ask the reporter before you sit down with them, what would you like to hear? How can I prepare best for this? So that way you become a little bit more prepared and eventually more relaxed. But in the event that even if you have done that and you are feeling a little bit tense, you can do some things like vary the pace at which you are speaking. So if you speak a little bit more slowly, you can become a little bit more relaxed. Or yeah, I think that's the best tip that I can give you. You can speak more slowly and you can become more relaxed. But the most important is what I've already shared, that prepare well in advance. So that way you get the confidence to be able to sail through the interview. And fortunately, most reporters are mindful of this fact. So they do look out to see if their interviewee is showing some signs of stress. So they will try to work around that and try to make you more comfortable.
Thank you so much. We have a comment and also a question from Emmanuel. Emmanuel is asking, a comment first is saying, increasingly, plain language summaries accompany scientific articles. Maybe that can be a very useful resource, but also a question from him saying, any special approach to presenting rebuttals?
To presenting to what?
Any special approach to presenting rebuttals?
Sorry, can you say that again? I'm missing the last part.
Any special approach to presenting rebuttals? Is this question coming from Emmanuel?
Rebuttals.
Yeah, rebuttals.
Maybe I could do better with an example here, because I'm not quite sure. We can come back to this question if I can be given a little bit of more context. Apologies that I'm not able to offer a response right away.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we have another question coming in from Grace. Grace is asking, how do we correct journalists if they misquote us? Any tips?
Yes, so if you're misquoted, you can reach out to them and let them know that this is incorrect. The correct version is so and so. Yeah, so you shouldn't feel confined, but you should be able to talk to the journalist and let them know that you have been misquoted. I think that can even help you to build a better relationship going forward. If the journalist knows that they made the mistake and they are a professional, they will own up to it and they will do their best to correct it.
Thank you so much. I see a similar question which you've just answered from Neke. So I hope Neka Lindiwe has answered that. Neka had asked, how do you ensure that journalists transcript is not misquoted. So that was a combination with what you just talked about. The other question comes from Ezilina. How should scientists understand the urgency that comes from newsroom that oftentimes pushes the reporters to publish before the scientists get to cross-check the story?
Yes, yeah. So this is one piece of feedback that we get repeatedly from reporters, that many times they're pressed for time. Newspapers will want to have their stories in by 3 p.m. Broadcasters will also want to have their pieces as soon as possible. So if the scientist is not responding, then it becomes a problem. That is why during my presentation, I explained that it is very important that you should be accessible. When I was talking about how you can help reporters to tell stories about science, I said one important tip that you can keep in mind is that you have to be accessible. So accessibility means that being present for interviews and yeah, just making yourself available. So you can ask the reporter what their deadlines are. And if you know that you really can't make it, you can tell them that you can't make it because you really can't force yourself to speak when you're not prepared. That is how you find yourself in the pitfall of being misquoted and what have you. So it is always good to keep good and honest communication with the reporters. If you're unable to do something, you let them know that you cannot do it. If the matter is quite serious, you try your best to be available at the time that they need you. Or if you can delegate to anyone in your study team, you can also do that. But key is always keep an open and honest line of communication between yourself and the reporter, so that at the end of the day, you're able to understand each other and also the different situations that you are in.
We also have another question coming in from David. David is asking, do you have any advice on how best a researcher can communicate her findings to a stakeholder, either a journalist or community, that you know has bias on the topic? Sometimes you find a journalist has some bias on your topic. How best do you handle such a situation?
So most important, always stick to the truth, your truth. Come with your facts, present your context, and make your call to action. That is the best weapons that you can have in your arsenal. As long as you present the truth to them, then you are fine, and it becomes part of their own personal responsibility to report the truth. But what you shouldn't do is try to misrepresent information in order to sway them to buy into your opinion. So you should always stick to the truth, back up that truth with any background information, context, and anything that can really help you present a case for yourself.
Okay, thank you so much. Another question from Romana. Romana is asking, have you ever, I think this is directed to the institution where you work, Lindiwe. So she's asking, have you ever used media clinics to train journalists on how to report on science? How have you gone about it?
All right, so I'll share again about the Journalist in Resident project. So we do quarterly meetings where they come and listen to different presentations from our different research projects. The scientists will tell them how they're doing their science, the methodologies, and other relevant information pertaining to that. But then we also invite lecturers from universities that offer training in journalism, and we invite them to come and teach the reporters how to write effective science research stories. So we do that about 3 or 4 times a year, and we see that it actually does help us out.
Thank you so much. Karen is asking, how can scientists and journalists build trust between each other? And this is, and I think she's basing her point or her question on the issue of journalists misquoting scientists. How do we build trust between scientists and journalists?
All right. So I think it really goes down to the different personal values that each of them have. Once they have the personal values in check, then what I'm about to say can actually make an impact. So telling each other the truth, making sure that they're each accessible to one another can really go a long way in helping them to build trust, and keeping honest lines of communication. This can go a long way. But even if these factors are there, if each of them, the researcher and the journalist, do not have personal values of wanting to build trust, then it can still become difficult. But as a way, as some of the tips, I can just say that, yeah, you need to keep the lines of communication open and honest, be truthful with one another. And but what really anchors all of this is to have your own personal values of trust. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. I think Neka is back asking, in your experience, how do you deal with journalists to enforce all sensitive information about your work is leaked to journalists?
All right. So for that, we have an institutional stance, and that is part of our crisis communication. So when the information that has been issued out about us in the media and it turns out to be false, we trigger those crisis communication protocols. And one of them is we get in touch with the media outlet, we issue out a statement to them, and we state the correct facts. And if they're a responsible media outlet, then they can go ahead and issue a retraction. But fortunately, it has not happened to us in the recent years, but we do have that in place. So as an institution, it's important that you should have these protocols in place, crisis communication protocols. But I can just fill you in on what can already constitute the crisis communication protocols. And one of them is to issue official statements refuting the negative and false allegations leveled against you.
Thank you so much. We have another interesting question here coming from Benti. Benti is asking, in case of innovative studies, how do scientists communicate to journalists within the context of public urgency of the finding and the science drawback? How to align comprehension between scientists, journalists, and audience?
Okay, so I'll answer this by using a practical example. Early last year, around February, March, when all over the world, the biggest talk was about the COVID-19 vaccine. And there was a lot of misinformation that was going on around the vaccine, especially in this region of the world. So many things being said about the vaccine, that it was poison, it was engineered against a certain race of people, and so many different things. So we knew that there was a lot of questions that the media had, and they were also looking for reputable sources of news or reputable experts that could give them what were actually factual things about the vaccine. So they reached out to us and said, we are looking for experts to talk to us about the vaccine, because there's so many things that we are finding on social media and what have you. So what we decided to do was, we are not going to do a press briefing, the traditional press briefing, but what we are going to do is we're going to have an educational webinar. So we conducted this webinar, we invited different journalists, and we had a panel of experts that gave lectures about how vaccines are developed in the first place, and also how the COVID vaccine was being manufactured in specific. So we found that through using this approach, giving them a lecture, an opportunity to engage and discuss with scientists and experts. It gave them the ability to be able to understand the matters better. So what happened following the seminar was that they did not write news stories, but they walked away out of the seminar having a better understanding of what vaccines are and how they are manufactured, and how the COVID vaccine itself was being manufactured as well. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think the final question come back to Emmanuel. So Emmanuel was asking, is there any special approach we use when journalists sometimes rebut your evidence as a scientist?
So also, let's say that a journalist has challenged what you are saying. All right. When this happens, my advice is still the same. Show them your facts, show them your supporting information, and stick to that. Resistance will always be there, and it can also come from journalists, like you have said in this case. But the best that you can do, and you can just hope for the best when you do that, is that you present your facts, you present your truth, you represent your supporting information to that. And chances are that the journalist might end up finally understanding your viewpoint. But if they don't, then don't fret, don't worry. As long as you are speaking your truth, then stick with your truth.
Okay, thank you so much. I don't see any other question from the Q&A box. So thank you so much, Lindiwe, for the insightful presentation this afternoon. I think the participants have learned a lot, especially on use of jargon. I think there is that tendency of researchers using jargon. So I think now it's a bit clear. When you use jargon, try to explain it immediately. So I'll just move to the next session, which is the closing remarks. So I'll just thank you and say this is the third and the last part of this workshop. And we thank our panel and our presenter this afternoon. As I said in the beginning of the session, this session is being recorded, and all the materials related to it will be shared to you via email. I think also the team from the Global Health Network will be posting where you can get more resources on the same. Also, on the issue of the certificate, remember that you have to at least attend 80% of the workshop and complete an evaluation form. The evaluation form will be shared via email from the Global Health team. Yeah, I think we are done. I'll just hand over the chair to Wema. Wema, over to you.